Have you ever heard of the night phantom? Not the dark, winged creature that many fear, but something far more terrifying: a human being. He was a notorious Iranian serial killer who lived in the capital, Tehran. He committed his crimes under the cover of pitch-black darkness with incredible stealth, so no one sensed his presence, until people gave him the chilling name, the Night Phantom. From the early 1980s until the late 1990s, Iran's capital lived in genuine terror because of this criminal. His brutal acts shook society, and for years the security forces were baffled, unable to catch him. One day, there was a woman named Touran Nazari, a 54-year-old who made a living selling women's clothing at a small stall in a local market to support her children. After a long, exhausting day, she packed up her things and began walking home on foot, as she couldn't afford a taxi. The road was long and dark, but she was used to walking every evening. Midway through her journey, she sat down on a bench in a public park to rest, unaware that this moment would be her last. From between the trees, the night phantom emerged from the darkness with eerie swiftness. He silently approached her, covered her mouth with his hand, and dragged her to an isolated spot deeper inside the park. He beat her until she lost consciousness, then brutally assaulted her and stole her money. Before leaving, he poured an accelerant over her body and set her on fire. Minutes later, passers-by noticed flames blazing in the park. They rushed to put them out, only to find the charred remains of a woman. After investigation, it was confirmed that the victim was Touran Nazari, the night phantom's first victim. At first, the police assumed the crime was driven by either hatred or theft. But weeks later, they were shocked to find a second identical murder. The body of another woman named Adi was discovered in a park in Karaj, Tehran. She had been assaulted and then burned in exactly the same way. The method was identical. The timing was close. The location was another dark park. It became clear this was the work of a single killer. Not long after, a third body was found, a 23-year-old woman murdered in the same brutal manner. It was then that the press coined the terrifying nickname, the Night Phantom, a shadowy figure who attacked women in parks and deserted areas after nightfall. Fear spread throughout Tehran and its suburbs. Women no longer dared go out after dark, and the streets were nearly empty after sunset. Even men began to feel fear, because the Night Phantom struck without warning, appearing suddenly from between the trees, then vanishing as if he never existed. At that time, the media was not as fast as it is today. The public only learned about these events after several murders had already taken place. But once newspapers finally reported that a serial killer was wandering Tehran's streets, people were plunged into days of true panic and dread. As fear spread through Tehran, the police stepped up their efforts, but the Night Phantom always seemed one step ahead. The next month brought a crime even more brutal than the rest. The victim was a 24-year-old woman named Ilahi Hematai Nejad. She had gone to visit her sister at a hospital in the capital. When she finished her visit, she decided to walk home on foot. The route from the hospital to her neighborhood passed through a public park, and she chose the shortcut despite the late hour. But she never made it home. The next morning, the city woke up to another shocking revelation. Her body was found in the park, stabbed more than 20 times, assaulted, and burned alive in the exact manner of the previous murders. By now, authorities had no doubt. A serial killer was on the loose, hunting women in the darkness. The police declared a state of high alert across Tehran and its suburbs. Anyone with a history of harassment, assault, or theft was taken in for questioning. Hundreds of DNA samples were collected from suspects to compare with genetic material found at crime scenes, but all results were negative. None matched the actual killer. Under intense security pressure, the Night Phantom appeared to stop killing for a time. People began to hope that the terror was over, thinking perhaps the killer had been caught or had fled, but they were mistaken. Just 2 months later, the Night Phantom returned to commit his most savage crime yet. In a place known as Asia Boulevard in central Tehran, a fire broke out in a public park. When firefighters arrived, they discovered a horrifying scene. Two charred bodies of women. They were later identified as Azam the Bet, 49 years old, and her daughter Munira Kahoji, 17 years old. Both had been assaulted, stabbed more than 27 times, and then doused with fuel before their bodies were set alight. This double murder became a turning point for the police and for the public. After a lull in violence, the Night Phantom had struck again, with even greater cruelty, as if openly challenging the authorities. Only weeks after the double murder, Tehran was shaken by another tragedy. This time the victim was Brandberg, a fifth-year dental student and the daughter of a high-ranking Interior Ministry officer. The Night Phantom had been observing her for some time, learning her routines. One night, as she was returning from visiting friends, he lured her into a park in West Tehran, committed his brutal crime as usual, and set her body on fire. This incident was seen as a direct affront to the Iranian police, showing that the killer feared no one, not even if the victim was the daughter of a senior official. Public pressure mounted. Women took to the streets demanding government protection, shouting, "If a high official's daughter could not be safe from the Night Phantom, what about us?" After the murder of dental student Brandberg, Tehran was thrown into an unprecedented state of alert. Patrols were deployed across every neighborhood, especially in the public parks that had become the scenes of the Night Phantom's crimes. Authorities ordered security forces to cover every corner, with strict instructions. Not a single tree should go unwatched, and no shadow in a park should exist without an undercover officer nearby. Long nights passed with police on edge and citizens gripped by fear. Everyone waited for the Night Phantom to reappear, and all hoped to be present when he was finally caught. One day, just before sunset, security forces were preparing to take their positions inside the parks. Suddenly, they noticed a strange man lying on his back in the middle of one park, hands behind his head, as if simply relaxing. A nearby officer approached him and asked, "What are you doing here?" The man replied calmly, "Nothing. I came to visit a friend, couldn't find him at home, so I decided to rest here for a bit." The officer said firmly, "This area is closed tonight for security reasons. Leave immediately." With a cold smile, the man said, "All right, as you wish." He stood up and left the park. No one could have guessed that the man they sent away was the Night Phantom himself. A few hours later, the same man returned to the park from the back entrance, believing the security forces had left. But one of the officers recognized him from earlier and approached him quickly, asking angrily, "Didn't I tell you to leave? Why are you back?" The man stumbled and tried to repeat the same excuse, but the officer insisted on searching him. He was taken to the police station for identification, and that is where the shock came. His real name was Gholam Reza Khoshrow, born in 1964 in the city of Faj, Khorasan province, and he had lived in Tehran since his youth. When police checked his record, they found a long history of crimes. In 1982, he was arrested for alleged espionage for the Soviet Union. In the 1990s, he was imprisoned multiple times for harassment, kidnapping, and theft. He had also worked as a taxi driver, using the job to lure women into dark places for assault and robbery. Suspicions grew, and police requested a DNA sample. He initially refused but was eventually forced to provide one, and the result was shocking. His DNA matched perfectly with the genetic evidence found at the Night Phantom's crime scenes. The monster had finally fallen. Faced with overwhelming evidence, he did not deny it for long. Instead, he smiled and calmly said, "Yes, I am the Night Phantom, and people feared me more than I expected." He began recounting his story with a strange pride, as if describing a work of art rather than horrific murders. "I was once married, but my wife left me. From that day on, I began to hate women. I decided to take revenge on all of them, Every woman I saw, I treated as the wife who betrayed me." He explained that he began his crimes in the early 1980s. At first, he attacked women at night in dark streets, stabbing some and leaving others injured. Later, he evolved his method to burning and concealment. He added, "I loved the darkness. I hid behind trees and watched my victim like a bat stalking its prey. I loved the name they gave me, Night Phantom, because it described me perfectly." After hours of interrogation, the Night Phantom, Gholam Reza Khoshrow, began revealing horrifying secrets about his crimes. In a cold, matter-of-fact voice, he told investigators, "I have killed many women. Some I buried in the outskirts of Tehran, and others have never been found." He detailed each crime precisely, naming locations and methods. He explained how he lured some victims with his car, pretending to be a taxi driver, then took them to isolated spots where he assaulted and murdered them in cold blood before disposing of their bodies in different locations. Investigators visited the sites he mentioned and indeed discovered the remains of unknown women, cases that had been closed for years without ever identifying the killer. It became clear. This man was not just a criminal, but a professional serial killer who had operated in the shadows for decades. After completing the investigation, Gholam Reza Khoshrow was brought to court, charged with murder, assault, arson, and theft. His image appeared in newspapers and on television, and several women who had survived his attacks came forward. They testified in court, describing the terror they had endured when he tried to harm them. The court ordered 214 lashes as a symbolic punishment from the surviving victims before the final verdict. A moment for the public to witness the man who had terrorized Tehran for years receiving justice from those he had tried to destroy. After the lashes, the final sentence was issued: death by hanging in public. On the morning of the execution, hundreds of Tehran residents gathered in a public square to witness the end of the Night Phantom. The scene was solemn. People stared at the man who had terrorized the city for years, standing handcuffed and silent. As the rope was placed around his neck, a mother from the crowd cried out, tears streaming down her face, "Why did you kill my daughter? She was young. She had harmed no one." The Night Phantom did not respond. He only looked up at the sky, as if realizing that the long night he had lived in was finally over. Seconds passed, and the man who had instilled terror into so many hearts was gone. His chapter closed forever. People left the square whispering, "Justice may have been delayed, but it has finally come." Thus, the curtain fell on a story among the darkest Tehran has ever witnessed. A man transformed from a broken human into a killer who despised the light, finally facing his inevitable fate under the sun. This was the story of the Night Phantom, the serial killer who terrorized an entire city, only to fall before the justice of heaven. Until the next story, stay safe. Crescent Moon.